My name is Christian Weaver. I am a barrister and I represented the family of Awaab Ishak in their inquest.
Today's focus is on Awaab's Law, which represents landmark legislation introduced to protect social housing tenants from dangerous living conditions, named in memory of 2-year-old Awaab Ishak, who tragically died following prolonged exposure to damp and mould in his Rochdale home in December 2020. This law will force social landlords to investigate and fix hazardous conditions within strict timeframes. I spoke to Barrister Christian Weaver, who represented Awaab Ishak's family during the inquest that changed housing nationally. He's also the author of 2 books, The Law in 60 Seconds, A Pocket Guide to Your Rights and Your Right to Protest. Understand it, use it. Both written to help people understand and use the law with confidence.
Awaab Ishak was a 2-year-old boy that tragically died due to prolonged exposure to mold in his home in Rochdale. And what made that case particularly significant was the fact that his family had repeatedly complained about the state of the accommodation and they had been ignored in entirety. Now, at the inquest, this all came out, and the family were clear that they never wanted another person or another child to die in the same tragic way that Awabi Shak did. They spoke of how they would see their child having coughing fits, and it always sticks with me. They would say that the fits were so bad that they wanted to take him out of the house. Then, whenever they took him out, because the coughing fits were so bad, he wasn't in a fit state to be outside, so they had to bring him back in into their very home that was causing him these issues. So the family committed to ensuring that that could never happen to another child again, or certainly wanted to do all they could to ensure that. And that led to a long campaign for something called a WAB's Law. And over 170,000 people signed a petition calling for it to support them. And it came into law last month. So a real positive.
Yeah, last month. So for anybody who may be catching up online, last month would be October of
That's right.
2025. Yeah.
So 27th of October, it kind of came into effect. So although the law there'd been a commitment for the law to exist, and then the regulations came into place that could facilitate this law, it came into force in a way that the ordinary person could use it on the 27th of October of this year.
Okay. How will the Awaab's Law work in practice?
Absolutely. So if you live in social housing and there is an emergency hazard in your property, that's something that could genuinely cause you significant risk of harm to your health or your safety. Think of exposed electrical wiring or a very severe leak. Now it's the case that within 24 hours, your landlord will have to see to that issue and make safe your property. And if your landlord can't make safe the property, they must, free of charge, ensure that you're in or offer you suitable alternative accommodation. And then when it comes to significant damp or mold, your landlord now must investigate within 10 working days of them being notified. And once they've done their investigation, within 5 working days, your property must be made safe. So it represents a real change in how things were done previously. And in particular means that whereas previously families were ignored in these situations, there's now the law behind tenants that means that if they're ignored, they can actually do something about it.
And just to clarify, this law, has it been put in place for just social housing, or is it for also, does it apply to also private tenancy?
Yeah, so for the time being, it's just social housing. However, the government have committed to extending it to private rented accommodation. Awab's family are committed to ensuring that it goes to private rented accommodation because, of course, as your question alludes to, the issues that exist in social housing aren't exclusive to social housing. They also exist in the private rented sector as well. So yes, absolutely, both are important, and we're pushing for it.
A new social housing law means emergency hazards must be made safe within 24 hours. To find out more about what the new law covers, visit gov.uk/social housing.
And so how will this Awaab's Law actually be enforced?
The very first thing would be that a person reports it to their landlord immediately if there's an issue. What we hope is that because landlords will now know that there is power that these tenants have to go to court, actually that will mean that the issues are sorted. But if not, a person can also go to the housing ombudsman. And the housing ombudsman have the ability to pay compensation, order a landlord to sort issues out. So there are significant things that can now be done. And of course, if all of that fails, and we really hope that this isn't the case, but then now a person does have the ability to take their landlord to court on the basis of the Awaab's Law obligations not being met.
For those who don't know, what is a housing ombudsman and how can a housing ombudsman be found by someone who may not know how to?
Yeah, of course. There are a number of ombudsmen that exist in very different parts of societies. There might be a transport-related ombudsman or a health-related one. And this is the housing-related one. And effectively, to kind of simplify it and say it in a layperson-friendly way, it's a body that has oversight when it comes to housing. So if you've made a complaint to your landlord and your landlord hasn't dealt with the complaint, and only if that's happened first, you first have to try with your landlord, but
Mm.
then they are effectively the next stage of escalation. So that's what an ombudsman is. And it exists in a lot of different parts of society, as I say. But in a housing context, you complain to your landlords, nothing's done. You can then escalate, take it further to the ombudsman.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. So, what if the landlord does not comply? What should you then do as a tenant?
Good question. So the first thing is always try and have evidence. So, it's important that if I imagine most communications with the landlord will be over email. So fortunately, they are usually date and time stamped. But the first thing is, make sure that your evidence is there. Make sure it is the case that they have actually breached a Awaab's law and there isn't more time that your landlord has.
Mhm.
But yes, certainly if they have breached a Awaab's law, then as we were saying in the earlier question, housing ombudsman would be your first bet, and they can assist you there. But then, of course, if that doesn't work or you don't feel that there's been a just resolution at the end of that, then of course, yes, you can actually take court action yourself.
Okay, and whose responsibility is it to rehouse residents
The
if like
landlords.
the conditions are not actually livable for the meantime?
Brilliant question. And it's the landlords. And that part's really important because previously we've seen situations where people are scared to tell their landlord about the dire conditions that they're living in because they're thinking, oh gosh, like, will I have to find a way to move out? I can't afford that.
Mhm.
No. Under Awaab's law now, if there's an issue that breaches Awaab's law in your home that isn't rectified or can't be rectified in that time, and that might sometimes be the case, the issue might be such that it can't be rectified in a certain amount of time. The responsibility is the landlords to find you or certainly offer you suitable alternative accommodation.
A new social housing law means dangerous damp and mould must be investigated within 10 working days. To find out more about what the new law covers, visit gov.uk/social housing.
Okay, just to go back a little bit, just to make clear to people, what should tenants do if they have the damp, the mold, and the hazards in their home? Like, if we can just do it like step by step,
Yeah.
once again, just to make it absolutely clear what they can do.
Of course, very first step would be as soon as you identify it, in reality, I'd suggest take photos, make it clear what the situation is, and you send that email or
Mhm.
in whatever way you would normally communicate with your landlord. But you make that communication, you send that email, and you might want to actually mention Awaab's law within that. You might want to say, here it is, here's the issue. Under my Awaab's law obligation, or under the Awaab's law obligations, I know that this
Mhm.
means that the matter must be investigated within 10 working days. As we speak, social housing landlords are having a considerable amount of training on Awaab's law, so it should never be the case that you're having to remind them, but you might want to do that just to be on the safe side. At that point, your landlord will actually likely assess whether they deem the hazard to be a significant hazard. So when it comes to, or I should say, we're in phase one of a Webb's law right now that applies to emergency hazards and damp and mold, so significant damp and mold. So the landlord might assess for themselves if they think it meets that threshold. But then, yes, provided it does, they must investigate within 10 working days. And then after that, the home should be made safe within 5 working days. So that's what would happen there. And then if that hasn't taken place and you've not been offered suitable alternative accommodation, if it can't, or alternatively, your landlord's just not responded to you, then the very next step would be to, as we just discussed actually, Google the Housing Ombudsman, go onto their website, go through the process that's outlined there. Hopefully, the Housing Ombudsman will then be able to help bring about a situation that you're satisfied with. But in the event that doesn't happen, then your next Google search or your next bit of research can be, okay, I want to take legal action about this. And then that would be a stage you can take then. So if you search gov.uk/social housing, that will bring up a lot of information relating to Awaab's law. I also run a platform called The Law in 60 Seconds. And in the next week or so, I'll be releasing a video as well explaining people's legal rights under Awaab's law. So the information is out there, and I would encourage people to read it.
Awesome. The Law in 60 Seconds, is that a website? Is that a channel? What's it?
Yeah, if you Google it, it will all come up, but a channel on YouTube, and it's also a book as well that educates
Awesome.
people on their legal rights.
Awesome. Awesome. That sounds great. Thank you so much, Christian, for your time on this.
Thank you.
To find out more about what the new law covers, visit gov.uk/social housing-law.